Well, hello everyone. My name is Pam Knox. I'm the director of the University of Georgia Weather Network and also an agricultural climatologist. And I'm going to be talking today about two flash droughts that we've had in Georgia in 2016 and 2019. Just want to put things in historical context first. This is a timeline of all the droughts we've had in Georgia since 2000, which is when they started doing this drought monitor timeline. And you can see that we've gone through several periods of extended droughts. The first of the ones that are shown here is 1998 to 2002, and then two other major droughts. And then since then, two shorter droughts, the flash droughts I'm going to be talking about today in 2016 to 17, and then another one in 2019 as well. So Georgia is certainly no stranger to drought. It's happened quite often, and a lot of my life here has been really affected by the droughts that have come and gone. First drought I want to talk about is the 2016 drought. This is a timeline of drought that was put together by Chip Conrad and myself for an article that we wrote a few years ago about this. And you can see that this drought really lasted for 4 seasons, started in the spring of 2016 with a really long time period when not a lot was going on. We had abnormally dry conditions. The drought really developed gradually. It sort of crept into the area. And then over the summer, it maybe increased a little bit, waned a little bit towards the end of the summer. But it wasn't until fall when that drought really exploded and became much stronger. And you can see it really peaked right around the end of November before we started to get the winter rains come in. And that knocked things back somewhat. The very tail end is a drought down in Florida that started to increase the area of the southeast that was covered by drought. So lasted about a year in the southeast and really caused quite a bit of impact on agriculture in the area. The flash drought in 2016 was probably driven more by rainfall than temperature, and I'll show the rainfall in a minute. Here's a thermograph that shows the daily temperatures in Athens for 2016, and you can see the average temperatures in the green band, the extremes in red for extreme highs and blue for extreme lows, and then the grays are the actual temperatures for 2016. And even though there were some periods where it got relatively warm and other periods where it got pretty cold, we really did not have a really strong time period of near record temperatures until almost the end of October. It was quite warm that month. So a lot of the dry conditions that you saw in the previous slide were not really caused so much by temperature as they were by precipitation. Let me show you why. Down at the bottom here is a timeline that shows the daily rainfall values at Lafayette, Georgia, which is up in the northwest part of the state. And you can see that there's quite a bit of rain early in 2016, which caused things to look quite wet going into the growing season. And then there's a long period, which is shown by the pink arrows there, where we had rain, but it was fairly infrequent and it wasn't very strong. So we had a long period where the rainfall was below normal. And that was the time period which the drought really started to show up in the northwestern part of Georgia. You can see the map there in the top right shows the first week of the drought monitor when we had severe drought showing up in Georgia, up in the northwest part. It's interesting because by that time we were already seeing a lot of agricultural impacts from the drought, but really nothing that was showing up on the drought monitor because they were also including all that really wet conditions at the beginning of the year. Most of the temperatures early in the year were relatively cool all the way through May, but then the rest of the year was warmer than normal, which is what it usually is. In these days, we're seeing a lot of trends towards warmer temperatures. And then what's even more noticeable, if you look later in the season where the red arrow is on the timeline of rainfall, there's a long period of over a month with absolutely no rain whatsoever. So that coincided with the period when the flash drought was really ramping up quickly, starting in September and going all the way till almost the end of November. Long period, and of course not surprising that the temperatures would be very warm then as well. Now that spring dryness is interesting because that hit at the time when corn was growing and pollinating up in northwestern Georgia. So dry that the silk stayed so dry that pollen would not stick to it, and as a result of that, they just didn't have any kernels develop in a lot of the corn unless it happened to be in irrigated fields, which there's some up there, but there's definitely a lot of fields that are not irrigated there as well. So if we look at a list of some of the impacts from the 2016 drought, you can see there were a lot of wildfires across northern Georgia and into North Carolina, Tennessee, and Alabama. The picture on the left-hand side there just shows one of the days with a lot of the smoke. I can remember walking outside of my office in Athens and just having it smell like a campfire because of all the smoke that was coming off of those fires. Happens a lot more often out west than it does here in the southeast, but it was definitely memorable for me. And the picture on the bottom left there is a picture of Gatlinburg, Tennessee, with the fires looming over the city. So some of the other impacts from that drought include the lack of a corn crop in northwest Georgia. You can see down at the bottom there a difference between irrigated fields, which are on the outside, and the non-irrigated fields on the inside, which have very poor kernel production. And so that was a problem. Another thing that was really affected by the early part of the drought was the forage production. Right at the end of winter, of course, the farmers don't have a lot of hay left, and they're really counting on the pastures to green up so they can feed their cattle. But because it was so dry, the pastures stayed dry as well, and they really had to import hay from other places to keep their cattle alive, or they had to sell them off. We also saw over the course of the summer some of the streams were drying up in northeast Alabama and northwest Georgia. A couple places in Georgia actually had to truck in water. So there was definitely impacts from that drought that we saw across the. Now the 2016 drought, the flash drought part of it really ended towards late November when we started to get those rains, but it sort of morphed into a hydrologic drought. And you can see this is a hydrograph of the Chattahoochee River at Helen, which is up in the northeastern part of the state. And the stream flows went down all through the drought season, but they actually were at the relative driest conditions in the spring of 2017. So there were long time periods in January through March when they had never seen stream flows that low before. That certainly caused some problems. There's not a lot of tourism then, but there's some tubing that goes on that river. Certainly a problem for water supplies for some of the smaller communities along that river. And so the end of the flash drought partly ended because of rainfall, but also partly ended because eventually we started to get more rain from that. The flash drought of 2019 looks a little bit different. This is a timeline of the drought for that, and you can see it started again in March, but it really has two peaks. So in fact, some producers actually said we've had two different flash droughts in 2019 because they're looking at the very short-term impacts of the lack of rain and the dry conditions on agriculture. In this case, in 2019, I think that the flash drought was much more linked to temperature than it was to precipitation. Here you can see the thermograph. This time it's for Macon, so it's in the center of the state, but it works the same way. And I have highlighted here two time periods when we had a week or more of record-setting temperatures. So the first one corresponds to that first peak on the drought timeline, where things got dry very early because of the warm temperatures, and then settled down a little bit in the middle part. We had more rain, we had cooler temperatures, so evapotranspiration was lower. And then as we went on into late September and into the first week of October, we set daily records almost every day. In fact, it was warmer at the first week of October than it had been at any other time during the year. So that didn't really feel like fall at all. And that really contributed to that second peak of drought in the fall of 2019. Some of the impacts that we saw from the 2019 drought, we saw a lot of yield reduction in the crops again. Forage was completely lost. In fact, the earliest indicators that we were in this first peak of the flash drought, so I started getting phone calls from livestock producers saying, our grass isn't growing again. What are we going to do? And we're worried about whether or not they'd be able to apply for relief from the government for loss of forage, which in most cases they were not able to do. Late rain did come at the end. It caused some problems for harvest as well because it rotted the peanut vines And so a lot of the peanuts got left in the ground, and that reduced their yields as well. But finally, when that rain did come, they were starting able to produce winter forage again and started to plant their onions as well. I want to end the discussion here by talking about why we really think about flash drought a lot in Georgia. For one reason, we have water holding capacities in our soils that really don't hold a lot of water. And so that's a problem because we need to have that regular rainfall. There's not a lot there that plants can draw upon if we go through a dry spell. Second is that we do have a long growing season, as we do in most of the Southeast, which means that there's a lot of crops at the same time, a long period when evapotranspiration and evaporation is high because of the temperatures. And so flash droughts can develop very quickly in that sort of situation. And then third, from a standpoint of getting relief, a lot of the relief rules for groups like forage producers are linked to counties. In Georgia, we've got 159 counties. They're relatively small. You can see in the map there that they're much smaller than the similar counties in Alabama or in South Carolina. And so when you have relief that's linked to the counties, there's a lot of pushing by the producers to say, draw the line closer to me because maybe still just a county away. So really we're hampered, I think, by having such small counties compared to other parts of the Southeast. In the area that becomes eligible for getting this kind of forage relief is much smaller in Georgia just because of the county size than anything else. I'm going to end it there. I want to thank you for your attention, and here's my contact information. And I think we may have time for a couple questions, so thanks again.